The air inside the New York County Courthouse was thick, almost suffocating. Rows of spectators filled the gallery, murmuring among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. The defendant's table seemed oversized for the young man standing beside it, hands in his pockets, chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. Marcus Bennett, 19, stood accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the way Judge Harold Whitman looked at him made it clear the real trial had nothing to do with the law. Judge Whitman leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lazily against the polished wood of his desk. He peered down at Marcus over the rim of his glasses, his lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice carried a dry amusement. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor, they were all in on the joke. Marcus didn't flinch. He wasn't laughing. He had spent years preparing for this moment. Not this exact one. He never planned on standing here as a defendant, but he knew the courtroom like the back of his hand. While other kids memorized basketball stats, he memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he played mock trials in his head, arguing imaginary cases with himself. His mother, Angela Bennett, had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years, and Marcus had grown up listening to the stories she brought home. How prosecutors cut corners, how judges played favorites, how some defense attorneys barely tried. He absorbed everything. By the time he was 14, he could break down a trial better than most law students. But none of that mattered to Judge Whitman. To him, Marcus was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, flipping open the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again, but this time something shifted. Marcus's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. Because Whitman had just made his first mistake. But the courtroom hadn't noticed yet. The prosecutor, Thomas Langley, rose from his seat with the air of a man who had already won. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice carried that rehearsed confidence of someone who had delivered the same speech 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant Marcus Bennett was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 BMW 5 Series reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown where he allegedly attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution submits that the evidence speaks for itself." The words landed with weight. The crowd in the gallery shifted, whispering among themselves. On the surface, it sounded damning. A stolen car, a chase, running. Judge Whitman glanced at Marcus over the rim of his glasses, then turned back to Langley. "Go on." The prosecutor walked toward the jury box, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "The defense may try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Bennett is some unfortunate victim of circumstance." He turned, locking eyes with Marcus for the first time. "But, let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room thickened. Judge Whitman leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Marcus didn't blink. Langley continued, flipping through a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer James Rodriguez, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Whitman exhaled through his nose, nodding. "Sounds straightforward to me." And for most people in the room, it probably did. The case was clear-cut: a stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Marcus had spent too many years studying trials not to see the cracks. Still, he stayed silent, watching, waiting. Judge Whitman tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Marcus's lawyer, a public defender named Rachel Simmons, who had barely said 3 words since stepping into the courtroom. She stood up, shifting nervously. "Your Honor, my client—" Marcus placed a hand on her arm, a silent request. She hesitated, then sat back down. And for the first time, Marcus spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went completely silent. Whitman stared at him, clearly amused. "You'll what?" Marcus's voice was calm, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. Langley's smirk faltered for just a second before he let out a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Marcus took his first step forward. Because everything was about to change. The weight of the courtroom settled around Marcus as he adjusted his stance. His hands still in his pockets, he let the silence stretch just a little longer, enough to make them uncomfortable. Then, finally, he spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Langley raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Go ahead." Marcus took a slow step forward. "You said Officer James Rodriguez personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Langley exhaled sharply, already bored. "That's right." "And that testimony is written in his report?" "Of course it is." Marcus nodded, then turned to Judge Whitman. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." Whitman squinted at him. "On what grounds?" Marcus pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Rodriguez never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Langley's face. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took another step forward. "Your Honor, if the court allows me, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Rodriguez's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then it should match his location history. But," he let the word hang in the air, "I have a feeling it won't." Now the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Whitman frowned, glancing toward Langley. "Counselor?" Langley cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. "That report was filed by an officer of the law, Your Honor. Are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional?" Marcus gave a small, almost casual shrug. "If the officer was where he claimed to be, then the GPS data will prove it, but if he wasn't..." He let the sentence trail off. Whitman studied him for a long moment, then turned to Langley. "Does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Langley hesitated. The pause was just long enough the jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Marcus took a quiet breath. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their tactics, the way they played the system. And there was one thing he knew without a doubt. If Langley was confident in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Whitman sighed, rubbing his temple. Langley finally shook his head. "No objections, Your Honor." But the shift had already begun. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was loud. Langley shuffled his papers, his polished confidence cracking around the edges. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle." Marcus gave a small nod, his face unreadable. "That's true." He took a step forward. "But let's talk about that evidence for a second." Whitman raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. Marcus turned to the jury, making eye contact with each one of them. "The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling. But let's think about this logically." He took a deep breath, his tone staying calm, controlled. Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and walk out. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it? A few jurors exchanged glances. Someone in the gallery muttered something under their breath. Marcus didn't give them time to recover. The car in question was parked outside a convenience store hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends, and yes, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it, didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything from inside. Just a dumb moment of curiosity. He let that sit for a second. Then, in a voice that cut through the silence like a scalpel, he asked, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Langley cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, searching for something, anything, to regain control. Marcus wasn't finished. And while we're on the topic, let's talk about how that fingerprint analysis was done. He turned to Whitman. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist from this case subpoenaed to testify? Whitman blinked, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Langley. The prosecutor hesitated, then, reluctantly, Marcus's lips pressed together. So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine, ask about the chain of custody, or challenge the accuracy of the analysis? Langley's jaw tightened. Marcus nodded, like that was all he needed to hear. Interesting. Judge Whitman sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing this case was not the easy win he had assumed it would be. But Marcus wasn't done yet. Because the next thing he was about to say, it would change everything. Marcus took a slow step forward, his voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Judge Witt.